Yo, how's it going? So we got some night shift horror stories, and I got a few from I got one or two of my own, or I'll probably let it know. I'll tell it after this.
20-year-old Kelly Berg Dove lived with her 4-year-old daughter in Bridgewater, Virginia. She was a popular young woman. Not a single soul in all of Bridgewater seemed to have a bad word to say about her, least of all her loving husband, who she'd been romantically involved with since they were both high school sophomores. She
That's
also
great.
made a point of keeping in touch with her mother and sisters almost every single day. All in all, Kelly was about as wholesome as a person as you've ever likely to find,
So wholesome.
and even found the time to work night shifts at a local gas station to help support her family. They weren't exactly strapped for cash, but Kelly valued the idea of making a contribution that would allow them a taste of the finer things in life, as well as squirreling a little of her paycheck away each month for her daughter's college fund.
Nice.
But
Kind.
sometimes terrible things happen to the most wonderful of people, and on the night of June 18th, 1982, something was about to happen in the sleepy town of Bridgewater that would send shockwaves through the close-knit community. In the night in question, Kelly was working her usual night shift at Harrisonburg's Imperial gas station on South Main Street, Route 11. Kelly had gotten the job because her three sisters had either worked there in the past or were still currently employed by Imperial. The employer thought that it would make the girls more accountable for their work, and he was right. Whenever one was sick or couldn't come into work, another would always take her place. And on this night in particular, Kelly was covering for one of her sisters for a little extra college money for her young daughter. Kelly's
Nice.
mom, Rachel, was also a very loving and attentive person, and would often call the gas station whenever one of her daughters was working to check if they needed any food or hot coffee brought over to help them through their shift.
What a great mom.
When Rachel spoke to Kelly that night, nothing seemed to be amiss. To her, it was just another average night at a mostly quiet gas station in rural Virginia. But little did she know, this would be the last time she would ever talk to her daughter,
Oh, that's
as the
gold.
evening's events were about to take a rather dark and terrifying turn. At around 2:30 in the morning, long after Kelly's mom had retired to bed, Kelly apparently called the Harrisonburg police. The call was to inform them that she had been aggressively harassed by a guy that she described as improperly dressed. It seems Kelly was far too polite to describe what this male customer actually did in any kind of detail, but it's safe to assume that the implied meaning was that he had exposed himself to her. Just a few minutes after this first call, Kelly called again, this time pleading with the dispatcher for a patrol unit to be sent to the gas station. The same man that apparently exposed himself was calling the station to make obscene threats, and it seems that Kelly was growing anxious as she believed he was willing to follow through with them. The dispatcher promised to get a unit out to her as soon as possible, and that she should hang tight. However, just moments after the second call ended, Kelly dialed 911 yet again, only this time she was in a complete panic. With a voice that was dripping with fear, she demanded to know how far away the responding officers were, as the same deranged customer had apparently returned and was sitting in a silver or gray Ford that was parked in the gas station's parking lot.
Damn, bro.
The last thing the 911 dispatcher heard was Kelly screaming that the man had just gotten out of the vehicle and was heading towards the gas station's main building. She then slammed the phone down, apparently preparing to defend herself. The cops rushed over to the Imperial gas station, expecting to arrive to a violent assault in progress. But to their bemusement, when they arrived at the gas station, the place was as quiet as the grave. They searched the entire site, but Kelly was nowhere to be found. All that remained was her purse. There were no signs of any kind of violent struggle, no indications that the store had been robbed. But there were also no clues as to where Kelly was. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. What's clear is
Nah.
that if the suspect was armed, he could have forced Kelly into his vehicle in just a matter of seconds. Kelly's family believed this to be the case, as they insisted that any attempt by an unarmed man to grab her and shove her into their vehicle would have resulted in Kelly fighting back vigorously. The police investigation that followed led officers to a nearby convenience store, where a clerk informed them that he had been visited by a man driving a gray vehicle about a half hour before Kelly's disappearance.
Turns out it was an
The clerk
alien.
told him that the man was aged between 20 to 25 years old and had blonde, shoulder-length hair. This might seem like an obvious lead, but the cops were unable to track down this man, so no connection between him and Kelly's apparent abduction could ever be made. The police then interviewed Kelly's 3 sisters, who were also employed by the gas station. They were shocked to hear that the obscene kind of phone calls that Kelly had received that night were commonplace, but that no one had ever acted on them, believing them to be from some harmless old pervert whose bark was louder than his bite, so to speak. They also didn't entirely believe that the man that had harassed Kelly that night was the same person making the phone calls, as there didn't seem to be anything overly threatening about the lewd calls, while the driver of the silver or gray Ford was obviously aggressive enough to show up to the gas station in person. Yet after news hit that one of the gas station girls had apparently been abducted, the phone calls seemed to stop entirely for a while, only resuming around 6 weeks later when this apparently harmless old perv called and made lewd comments to one of the gas station's new hires. This could well be because whoever was making the calls simply wasn't involved in the abduction and didn't want to implicate themselves as a suspect in such a violent and disturbing crime. But it also could be because the same person who made the calls was satisfied with abducting Kelly and didn't feel the need to make another call, not until the same hunger resurfaced in them around a month and a half after the fact. When local media outlets contacted Kelly's parents regarding their daughter's disappearance, they gave a rather shocking answer to some very probing questions. When asked if they had any idea who might have kidnapped or harmed their daughter, and if this person might be a member of the local community, Kelly's parents unequivocally answered in the affirmative. Although the police had asked them not to publicly speak the man's name, they believed her abductor had been someone Kelly had gone to high school with, someone who had a long history of indecent exposure and making obscene telephone calls, and according to Kelly's sister, also drove a silvery gray Ford. But surely if Kelly had known the man personally, even just by association, she would have named him on one of the 3 911 calls she made leading up to her abduction. But it's also very possible that this person had either obscured their face somehow, or Kelly had simply not recognized him given that they had both graduated some time ago. There's also the possibility that Kelly was so terrified that she just failed to mention the man by name during one of the calls. Either way, the police obviously found the possibility of this man being the culprit so plausible that they asked Kelly's parents not to use his name publicly. Yet despite this, he was never charged with any crime, as there was simply not enough evidence to attempt any kind of conviction. There were several other suspects in the case, and authorities were sure to question all of them. But at a time when CCTV cameras and DNA evidence were still just technological pipe dreams, actually placing a suspect at the scene that night was all but impossible.
In the 80s?
For all intents and purposes, the person who showed up at the Imperial gas station that night was a ghost. Someone who showed up, bundled Kelly Berg Dove into a vehicle, and then seemingly vanished themselves. Barely a trace of either of them was left behind. Merely a purse and a vehicle description.
Sounds like they gave up most of anything.
For the cops to go on to secure a suspect, Kelly, or her body. Almost 40 years later, what happened that night remains almost a total mystery, with Kelly being declared legally deceased by local authorities. Despite her family pouring money into private investigators to try to find out exactly what happened, they're no closer to getting any solid answers as they were almost 4 decades ago. The only truth we have of that night is the terrifying reality that Kelly went to work that night, not suspecting a thing, and ended up encountering someone that caused her to vanish from the face of the earth. And that, horrifyingly enough, is something that could happen to each and every one of us.
Yep.
If you really like my content and want to support me, please like this video and click the subscribe button. It helps me to grow my channel and is essential in reaching a wider audience. Most of you watching my videos aren't subscribed to my channel, and that's why my animations can't reach their full potential. They aren't recommended to more people who would surely love my content as much as you do. You can always unsubscribe at any moment. Thank you in advance, and enjoy the rest of the video.
It was the summer of 2015, and
Yeah.
I had just gotten my first well-paying
I
job
love the
at a
narrator.
gas station. It was one of the more bigger gas stations you'd see about halfway to a destination to stop for food or to use the restroom. While it might have not been the most exciting job in the world, it was definitely one that paid a substantial amount of money. For reference, I'm a female and was 24 years old at the time. I'm pretty short and weigh around 100 pounds. At the time, I didn't have a car, so I had to rely on taking the public bus to get to and from work.
Yeah. Worst.
Since business was usually pretty slow during the night shift, my manager allowed me to chill out behind the counter if I had nothing to do. Sometimes you'd have your occasional 2 or 3 customers come in at around 1 a.m. for a late night snack, but other than that, the store was mostly dead.
Yep.
Most of the time, I'd be at the front minding my business, scrolling through Instagram and whatnot. It was a chill and great opportunity for me to catch up on my personal needs as well. One night, my manager had asked if I could work late as the guy working after me had suddenly quit and went to go make a living in watchmaking. Apparently,
That's
this guy
pretty dope.
obviously hadn't heard of a 2 weeks notice before, so I was livid to
I
say
hate
the
that.
least.
Yep, I could feel that.
Whatever, it was extra pay and I couldn't afford to fall behind on rent. With me practically working double shifts at this point, I was running the store for long hours into the night.
I hate working
Some
double
nights
shifts.
I'd have
Those
to
were
bring
the
my
worst.
coffee to help keep me awake as the job could get boring pretty quickly. For the first few months, everything seemed to be going well, and I was even able to catch up on my studies. I had worked with my other coworker, Brandon, but we never really exchanged conversation as he mainly worked in the back. There was this one night, however, where something happened that little did I know would completely break me. I was working my usual nightly shift, and I was cleaning up the floors after a customer had vomited from drinking too much.
Oh God! Thank God I never had to go
Once
through
I
that.
clean everything up, I hear the door open, and in walks a man with a backpack. He had a white beard and wore a dirty white tank top with cargo pants.
A
I
homeless
wave
man.
at him as a way of saying hello, and he then gives me an unsettling grin while looking back at me.
An
I'm from the
unsettling
South,
grin.
so it wasn't uncommon to see these types of people every now and then. He proceeds to grab a 6-pack of beer from our refrigerator and puts it on the counter, and I say hi once again. So, Ashley, what time
the-
are you out of here?
Fuck.
Right from the start, this guy smelled like straight up weed, and I could smell the alcohol in his breath. I nervously chuckle and say, 7. Ah, I see. Do you need a ride? I can take you home.
I'm good, fam.
I
Thanks.
tell him no thank you and that I already have one, and change the subject by telling him his total. He gets out his wallet and proceeds to hand me a $10 bill, making sure our hands touched.
Ah, I hate that.
I give him his change and tell him to have a nice night, and he then starts to ask if he could give me a ride home again. I tell him no, and he grabs his beer, giving me a wave before saying, "See you later, Ashley."
That's
he walks
weird.
out the door, and I watch him get into his truck and drive off. He doesn't actually know when I'm off, so I figured I was out of the woods.
Nah, that dude's waiting.
A
Definitely
few
waiting.
hours go by, and I finish up the remaining time for my shift before the person working after us comes in. I tell Brandon, who is still in the back, about what had happened, and he offered me a ride home so I wouldn't have to take the bus. Brandon and I walk out into the parking lot, and so far the coast seemed clear with no sign of the man. Long story short, he drives me home, and I go to sleep until the following night. My mom had dropped me off at work, and I go in to see my manager standing there. Upon entering, he immediately comes up to me and says, "Ashley, is everything okay?" how did you get home last night? I told him that Brandon gave me a ride home, and my manager gets this confused look on his face. Oh, that's weird because some guy came in just before 7. He said he was here to pick you up.
Wow.
A few months ago, I just started working the graveyard shift at a Target in a big city on the east coast of Massachusetts. For reference, I'm a female and was 17 at the time of the story. I'm pretty short, about 5'6", and weighed about 150 pounds. The store happened to be located in a residential area that wasn't so great or safe.
Okay.
What I mean by that is that there would sometimes be break-ins and shootings once in a while.
The fuck?
Let's just say the cops drove by several times a week. Because it wasn't as safe as most areas, there would always be a security guard by the front doors at all times named Chris. He was from Chicago and was a trained boxer, able to take on anyone who may pose a threat.
Let's go, Chris.
My coworkers and I tried talking with him here and there, but he was mostly quiet and focused on himself. Having him there made me feel a lot more safe, as I have really bad asthma attacks and get frightened really easily. At the time, I didn't have my inhaler or breathing treatment with me, so an asthma attack would result in me going to the hospital. One night at around 8 p.m., I was doing my usual routine of scanning the merchandise in one of the sections of the store. As I'm putting away some shirts where they belong, I notice a man at the end of the aisle. I politely ask if he needed help, and he walks right over to me asking where the men's shoes were. I direct him to section C, and he then says, "You know, you're very beautiful." I smile and say, "Thank you very much," and continue to stock the remaining shirts.
As one should.
The store is pretty much dead at this point, as we don't get a lot of customers at this time of night. He thankfully goes over in the direction of the shoes, and I finish putting away the shirts. One of my coworkers, Hannah, comes over to me and asks me about the guy who I was talking to. I told her I didn't know, and we both go and get ready to clock out as we were getting ready to close. Hannah tells me to go around and check for any more people who still might have been in the store. For the most part, the store is practically empty, but I then found the same man still in section C.
What the fuck?
I politely tell him that we were closing, and he gives me this weird grin on his face.
Uh-oh.
"Do you need a ride home? We can go back to my place." I tell him no and ask him to please leave the store and that we were closing. However, he doesn't listen and comes up to me and starts to grope me.
Oh, God.
At this point, I'm starting to panic, realizing what had just taken place, but knew I had to keep my breathing in check. I slowly turn around and walk toward the front entrance, telling Chris about what had just took place.
Alright, Chris, you gotta sleep this
Being
dude.
the nice and kind-hearted person he was, he confronted him and told him that he wasn't allowed back in the store again. The guy showed no remorse and just stayed quiet while walking out of the store. Because I was still a minor at the time, Chris offered to stay behind until my parents came to get me. When they came, Chris had told them about what had happened and explained that he would inform the manager the next day. I worked at that store for another 3 months and only saw the guy once, staring through the windows.
Oh, hell no.
I still don't know what would have happened had Chris not been there that night. When I was about 19 or so, I got my first ever real job working at a gas station during the spring. It wasn't the best paying job, but it was enough to get my foot through the door to start making payments for college and stuff. I lived by myself in a small one-bedroom apartment that my parents paid for, but got the job in the meantime to cover other expenses. My managers, being the jerks that they were, gave me a week of night shifts knowing I had a 7 a.m. class every morning. It was annoying to say the least, but I really needed the money.
Pretty sure.
During the night shift, you'd have people constantly come in and out for gas, and right around the 10 p.m. mark, business would be slow for the most part. After that, you'd maybe have one or two shady people come in once an hour for a snack or cigarettes.
God.
That being said, it's still a pretty good time where I could chill out for a few hours.
Yeah, it's like I remember it was like from 3 to
One night,
3 to
I
5
was
is when
on
it's
my
like the
shift
most
as
chill.
usual and had just finished serving what I thought was the last customer for the night as I was about to end my shift. As I'm packing up and getting ready to leave, a car pulls up right in front of the store and a man gets out. He wore a stained white shirt and had a scruffy beard with messy hair. He walks right in and I greet him with a hello and asked if I could help him with anything. He completely ignores my question and walks over to the refrigerators and grabs a 6-pack of beer.
Man.
I
It's not
live in
that
the
serious.
South, so people like this were very common around here. I tell him his total and he then says something that made my skin crawl. Hey, you're really pretty. I love your hair. Laughing
This is like
awkwardly,
mostly girls,
I tell him
like
thanks, and
poor
he
girls
proceeds
getting
to hand me a
harassed.
$10
Like this is
bill,
why you don't you never
making
really
sure our
let
hands
girls
touch.
work night shift. Honestly.
I give him his change and tell him to have a good rest of his night and go on my phone, hoping he'd get the hint to leave me alone. He thankfully left and I waited for my coworker who was working after me to arrive so I could go home. However, he must have been running late because it was 10 minutes past his shift and I was getting a bit annoyed. 10 minutes turned into 20 and then eventually 30. As I was about to call him to see where he was, I then noticed someone hiding behind one of the gas pumps.
Jesus.
It was a little hard to see, but because of the light, I could make it out to be the same man from earlier. I had no idea as to what he was doing, but I could tell that it clearly wasn't good. He then comes out from behind the pump, and I see that he's clearly hiding something behind his back, and I wasn't going to stick around to find out.
Big facts.
I grabbed my keys and was headed out toward my car when I see him approach the front door, giving me this unsettling look. It was a look of hatred and fury.
What the fuck?
Suddenly he pulls out a gun and
Oh,
proceeds
hell
to show
no.
it to me as if he wanted me to know that he was armed. At this point, I'm frantically dialing 911 on my phone, and he then shoots the lock and steps inside yelling at me while having me at gunpoint. He orders me to give him all the money in the register or he won't hesitate to pull the trigger. I take a few deep breaths
That's
and calmly
fucked up.
hand him the money we had, and he then takes off down the road. I call the police while bawling my eyes out in fear, and the operator tells me to stay on the line with her until an officer arrived. Thankfully, the guy never made it too far, as police had managed to track him down. Turns out, this guy was wanted for assault and murder.
Oh
The next
shit.
day, I quit my job at that gas station and now work at my local supermarket.
I worked at a museum a couple of years back, maybe a decade ago. I was a night shift security guard. It was as boring as you could imagine, but I desperately needed the money and it paid a few more dollars than any other job I could land, so I figured why not. I remember landing a construction job a year into working this night shift security job. I enjoyed construction a lot more and I desperately needed to get my life back on track. Being on night shift really messed with my mood and general well-being. The construction job I got had roughly the same pay, so it was a no-brainer even if I had to do a little bit more manual labor. As much as I disliked the job itself, I really liked all the people that worked at that museum. They were actually really cool. I went ahead and gave them my 2 weeks' notice and told them that I would stick around for as long as they needed me to find a replacement. They hired some skinny, pale guy named Justin. When I first met him, he seemed like he was a decent enough guy. After all, it really wasn't my problem once I left. After a couple of shifts with him, though, I noticed that he was an extremely awkward and very strange person. He did this thing where he would change the tone of his voice mid-sentence. It was really strange, and it almost made me feel like he had some kind of mental issue. Trust me, I wasn't being judgmental or anything, and if you heard it yourself, you would probably have had the same concern. Not that I thought that he was dangerous or anything, just a little out there with a possible mental illness, maybe even a speech impediment. But anyway, it was my third or fourth shift training him, and it was an ordinary night just like any other. As weird as he may have been, he seemed somewhat depressed or sad. I caught on pretty easily as he didn't make much of an effort to conceal it. We were making the usual trip throughout the entire museum, which was honestly a pretty long walk. We were probably about 10 minutes into it when I finally just asked him why he seemed so sad. He told me that he was really lonely and couldn't get a girlfriend. Again, if you had one look at this guy, you would probably understand why he couldn't get a girlfriend, let alone his weird personality.
That's cold.
I tried telling him that there were plenty of fish in the sea and that he could probably have some luck on the internet. Online dating wasn't as big back then, though. He kind of shrugged his shoulders and just continued being sad. Whatever. I didn't know what else I could tell him. After that point, it became gradually weirder and weirder with each passing night. It was really strange. For instance, he would start going on these massive monologues about the most random things in the world. I only had to stay for a couple more shifts, but it honestly became really intolerable being around this guy. There was one night where he talked for at least 15 entire minutes about the environmental harm of pizza crust.
What?
Yes, literally pizza crust. It made absolutely no sense in the world. I tried interrupting him a couple of times to ask what was up, but he just cut me off and even started ignoring me after a certain point. When you are completely alone in a massive building with one other person, trust me when I say that their mental well-being is very important.
Yeah, bro,
I gradually began feeling more and more unsafe in the presence of this weird guy. Justin just seemed like he was going crazy or something. Thankfully, my entire shift with him went by decently enough. It was still awkward and moderately unbearable, but it was at least over. I started my new job and everything seemed to be going really well. I had completely forgotten about Justin and life seemed to move on. I didn't really think about that security job anymore at all. That was until I heard about an interesting story from my friend a few months later. I still kept in touch with a few people from the museum that worked there during the day.
Damn, bro.
We were only Facebook friends, but that was enough for me. One of them messaged me to ask me what I thought about that guy Justin that replaced me. I was honest with her and told her that I thought Justin was really strange and possibly insane or something. And she typed back, "You're going to love this then." She then proceeded to tell me about Justin being fired for completely destroying an entire exhibit on night shift.
Whoa.
I guess they came in at the morning shift and found him trying to put it back together. They watched the security footage and this guy literally tried to fight a dinosaur skeleton. I guess he had been acting really weird that night, judging by what she had told me about the rest of the security footage.
Trying to fight a dino skeleton is crazy, bro.
The story is that they somehow found out he was on antipsychotic medication. They figured that he probably had stopped taking his medication.
Ooh.
That was all my friend knew.
Sort of like The Voices.
And that's all I know.
Was it Ryan Reynolds?
It's really scary how people can stop taking their very necessary medication on a whim, and then potentially have a complete mental breakdown. I started wondering if he had been off his meds when I first met him. All I know is that I'm kind of happy I don't ever have to see Justin again.
Or so you thought. Or so you thought. Well, that was a good video. Yeah, man, night shifts are crazy, bro. One of the craziest story, like not crazy, but it was like an eerie vibe I had one time during a night shift was I think it was like around 2 a.m. correct, and 2 or 3 a.m. and so you know, like people are coming in and out usually for beers, gets I was working in like the Hollywood area in a 7-Eleven, so it was always like lively, right? It was always like people coming in and out, partying and whatnot. And so at one point at one night, like, you know, everything's going in and out, and so at some point, I'm so used to just getting element. I'm not used to getting dragons, but anyway, back to the story. yeah, yeah. So everything is lively. At some point though, um, everything felt like it just kind of stopped, right? Like the lively feeling that was going around just stopped, and the streets and everything just started looking empty and dark. And I'm like, what the fuck? Like I had like a slight feeling about that. I was just like, okay, that's interesting. Like it was like eerie. I'm like, wow, that's weird. And this lady comes in, and this woman comes in, and she was completely on drugs, and she was just like tripping, like. And so she's like, she's just looking around, just like puts her hands on the table, and she's just like like she's breathing pretty heavy. And I remember she was breathing pretty heavy. She was short. She was like 5'4", and yeah, no, she looked like she was heavy on drugs. And so she's just like looking around and whatnot. And she tells me like, the devil's everywhere, right? And I'm just like, what? And I'm like, oh, okay. And she's just like, and so she goes like a strong deep breath, and she's like, he's everywhere, and you never know where he's hiding, or where he's in, or where he's at, and or where and so she kind of continues on with that, right? And I ask her like, do you need anything? And she's like, yeah, can I get a black and mild? And so like I'm like, sure. And so I give her the black and mild. She leaves me. She was short change, big time. She only gave me like 85 cents, like 70 or 90 cents, when the black and milds were like $1.25 at this point. And I'm just like, I don't really want to deal with her. And I couldn't get this like eerie, like me and her were the only two people in this, like in this whole entire like area. And it was just like this eerie feeling of, it was just, she was just there. And as she leaves, right, like maybe 5 minutes like pass, and I just get, and the lively feeling started coming back into the atmosphere, like everything started coming back, and the people started coming back in and out, and started but for a slight moment though, everything stopped, and she came in, and she came in with that crazy like energy, which was like, if it reminded me slightly of Constantine, when right, when like the whole like see, like where they were like in this like the streets, and man, I'm getting my ass kicked here, but let me see. No, it reminded me of Constantine. It really did, like with Keanu Reeves, when I think it was like he had to stand behind, like the Virgin Mary was behind there, and like the lights was the only thing that was like protecting her from like all these other forces around, energy forces around her. Well, that's what it kind of felt like. It was just like, it felt like how everything was just dark outside, empty, nothing, no, there was no signs of life, and it was just me and her, and it was just like we're just chilling, and it was just me speaking to this woman, and it was so eerie. I was just like, fuck, if like I couldn't, like, it was just like stuck in this like, what's it called? I can't remember the freaking I can't remember the word for it. It's a show. Um was it Twilight Zone? The Twilight Zone. Never mind me. I felt like I was stuck in this Twilight Zone with me and her. But yeah, yeah, that was like the craziest feel, like craziest, one of the scariest stories I have. There's like another one, but maybe I'll tell that some other time. But yeah, great video on the other hand by this.